When I was younger, I couldn't keep the thought from my head that people were out to get me. That any stranger I would see had no other motive in their life but to hurt me some way, somehow. The feelings must have begun around 8 or 9 years old. I remember laying wide awake at night, unable to sleep, for fear that at any moment our neighbors might decide that they didn't like the look of me and kidnap me or something. I would stay awake with these irrational thoughts until finally my mental exhaustion would make it impossible to worry any longer. My mother died when I was 6, murdered while she was going out to the grocery store. That's what my dad tells me anyway. I kept these feelings quiet for years until my dad caught me in one of my compulsive tics, leading to an interrogation. I must have been 12 or so at the time. I'd woken in the middle of the night, as I often do, on the verge of panic. See, the entrance to my bedroom sits directly across the dining table, which sits a few paces right from the front door. And it was among my greatest worries that someone would be inclined to break into my house looking for blood, and of course come for me. This thought, I convinced myself, was rational. My bedroom door was in plain view of the entrance. So if I had, for example, accidentally given someone a dirty look for the day, or if, reflecting on a day's conversation, if I'd come off as annoyed or otherwise offensive, it seemed perfectly reasonable to me that at the time they would want to look up my house in the white pages and seek revenge. Or some random drunkard would stumble in and decide he didn't like the look of me. But I digress. On that night, I had awoken and felt unreasonably drawn to check to ensure that the front door was locked. My dad locked it every night, and so I knew it was irrational to worry about. It was irrational to worry about it being opened by some stranger, but that rationale didn't quell my fears. I got up and checked. Peeking out my door, I glanced at the clock above the dining table, which read 1:22. I remember it so distinctly because January 22nd was the day my mother was killed when I was 6. As I approached the front door, my father came out to the hallway. "Son, what are you doing up at 1 in the morning?" I was just, It was useless to make up a lie. My dad worked for the police department, interrogating suspects, catching lies, and he was the best there was. I was making sure the door was locked. I finally choked out, my eyes wet with tears. "Oh, son." He sounded disappointed. "What are you afraid of, buddy?" I told him. I told him everything I was afraid of. I thought people I knew hated me, or that I thought some bad people might decide to come kill me. I felt stupid when I was explaining this to him. I always knew it was irrational. I felt so ashamed. My dad found a comforting tone. "Oh, son, bad people don't exist." I was struck. "But Dad, you said you fight bad guys all the time." My dad glanced away for a second, as if I caught him in a lie. He has upheld the idea that he was a good guy cop catching bad guys all day since I was young enough to understand good and bad. I suppose he thought it made me feel safe at the time. Right, but just because they do bad things does doesn't make them bad people. I looked confused, and I was extremely so. You see, everyone just wants to make it to the next day, to the next week, sometimes. They think doing bad things will help them make that happen, help their families eat dinner that day. And that's why people steal? I asked so innocently. Exactly. But why do people kill? He paused, obviously racking his brain. He finally answered. People get scared. And sometimes, when people are scared, they get angry. And scared and angry people do stupid things. Do you work with a lot of scared, angry people, Dad? He let out a small chuckle. Yeah, son, they're all just scared and angry, but never bad. Why don't you go get yourself a glass of water and head back to bed? We can talk more tomorrow if you'd like. He trailed off as I got up to do as he asked. When I laid down, I felt a lot better though. They're just scared and angry, and I could never scare anybody. My dad was always good at calming me down. Must have come with his job. We didn't end up talking about it the next day. He never brought it up, and neither did I. I didn't need to. I felt much better. I continued to feel better for many months. As any time I would get anxious, my dad would always remind me, bad people don't exist. Until I calmed down some 5-10 minutes later. Overall, life began to look up. My dad began dating another woman, his first since Mom died. And after about a year, he proposed. And they got married a few months after that. Sometime later, I must have been around 16. I hadn't had much more than a minor episode in years. The three of us were walking home from a movie theater, and that was situated just a few blocks from my house. We decided to walk to and fro because it was such a nice autumn night. We were all talking and laughing. Me, my dad, this woman I recently began calling Mom. It was dark by now and getting cold, but none of us noticed. The sidewalk narrowed as we entered a populated area from the field that sits the theater. I slid behind casually as my parents continued to talk ahead of me. I looked ahead still, content with my life as it currently existed, when I heard my mom begin to beg. Reality came to me again to see a man shouting at my parents ahead of me. My dad began to fight as he'd been trained to do at the academy when a gunshot went off, and the man ran. My dad opted against chasing and instead consoled my mother, who was still crying and shaken. I was still behind them, frozen. But it soon became apparent as my new mother collapsed that she had been hit with that frantic gunshot. She and my dad both clutched at her bloody abdomen as they yelled at me to call 911. I couldn't. I could only stand there. Bad people don't exist. Only scared and angry people. Bad people don't exist. Bad people. I couldn't keep it straight in my head. That saying that had comforted me for years was now losing that value, facing an impossible task. Police ended up arriving, called by concerned neighbors who hear the gunshot and the crying, but they couldn't save her. I hold some contempt towards the both of us for this. Not doing more. I feel like I could have run after him or done anything at all. And I feel like my dad should have fought harder to protect her. It's his job, both as a police officer and her husband. In the following months, it felt like I was 6 again. My nightly frights came back. My dad seemed just as broken as I was. I read online of people keeping weapons, guns, bats, knives at their bedside for protection. I hadn't previously considered it, as a kid, but it seems pretty natural now. Natural and safe. So I kept the biggest kitchen knife we had in the top drawer of my nightstand. I was worried with my dad finding out, so I always set my alarm early before my dad woke up so that I could put it back before he noticed it was missing. Every night afterwards, before getting up and checking the lock on the front door, I would be sure to bring the knife with me, just in case something found its way into my dining room. But a week later, I had a great epiphany. Yeah, when I woke up in the middle of the night clutching my knife, instead of approaching the front door, I instead turned down the hallway. I felt almost robotic as I creaked open my father's door and saw him lying there, doing nothing as he did when my stepmom was shot months ago, doing nothing as he did when my mom was raped and murdered over a decade ago. And so I approached the side of his bed and slid the knife slowly onto his neck. He did nothing again. He never does anything. So deadbeat he cannot even protect himself. And so I did it again and again, into his chest, into his gut, until my hand got so slippery with the blood I couldn't hardly hold the knife any longer. As I left the room in calmness, I noticed on the cabinet a freshly emptied bottle of muscle relaxers. That seemed about right. So cowardly. And I went to bed more soundly than I have since I was 6. I know what the police will say. I know what the public will say. That I'm a monster, a bad person. But I will just tell them what my dad had taught me. What I had nearly spent a decade training myself to believe. Bad people don't exist. Only people who are scared and angry.